So welcome, everybody. We're just going live on Facebook now, and we're recording this in Zoom. So welcome in. I can see people coming in already to the session here. If you're watching on Facebook, please make sure to share it with anyone you think might be interesting. This is going to be a very interesting session. As you can see from the slide, it's called A Place for Constructive Criticism and Critical Thinking with Yogesvara Prabhu. So this series, this Progressive Vaishnava conference series, are tackling all these kind of topics that many of us are thinking quite a lot about, and there's not always a forum for discussion, certainly not in the broader sense. So this is a place for us the group is a place to have these conversations, and these kind of more deep dive conversations are opportunities to come along, listen, and get involved, ask questions as well. So I'm just gonna stop sharing our slide for a moment. And I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'll do an intro before me and Yogesvara start to have a conversation. So the session is going to be up to a maximum of an hour and a half. It's going to be conversational. I'm really keen to talk to Yogesvara about these topics. He's been a devotee for over half a century. I had a chat with him a couple of weeks ago, and I found it really insightful. So I'm excited to share that with you. Throughout, you'll have the opportunity in the chat here in Zoom to send a message to me, and then I'll field the questions and bring them in. I may also ask you, if you're not too shy, to come on camera, and you maybe ask the question yourself if you wish. Equally, if you're watching this in Facebook, do share your comments and any questions, and I'll also be watching out for those and bringing them in as well. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction to give you a bit of background to Yogesvara, if you're not familiar with him. So his given name Joshua M. Green, Yogesvara. He was initiated by Prabhupada in 1970 in London, although he's now in New York. He also was part of that group of devotees that recorded the George Harrison's Radha Krishna Temple album, which was an exciting time. And then he spent 13 years in temple life, and he traveled with Prabhupada as well. In Europe, he was his French language translator. He was also the temple president in Paris and later in Philadelphia. And he was also the director of ISKCON's French publishing office and editor of Bhakti magazine. He currently serves as a mediator for ISKCON Resolve. He sits on the board of directors for the Bhaktivedanta Institute in Gainesville, where they're looking into all kinds of research around science and consciousness. He got his master's degree in religious studies at Hofstra University, where he taught Holocaust studies and Hinduism. And he spent 10 years doing that. And he has also written biographies of Holocaust survivors that have sold more than 500,000 copies. He's also written quite a few Krishna conscious books. A great one called Here Comes the Sun, The Spiritual and Musical Journey of George Harrison, Gita Wisdom, An Introduction to India's Essential Yoga Texts, and Swami in a Strange Land, How Krishna Came to the West, which was an authorized biography of Srila Prabhupada. He's also a documentary filmmaker as well, like myself, and he's made films about the Holocaust, which have been on PBS and Discovery. So I'd like to give you a huge welcome, Yogesvara. Really good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
That's my pleasure. I look forward to this.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to get right into looking really at, constructive criticism, critical thinking. Why are these important? Are they important? Do they relate to us, or are they just things that happen out there in the world? So many different things. But I wanted to start off by asking you have been in and around the movement, as I said, for over half a century. What would you say are some of the most dramatic changes that you've seen from before until now?
Well, I mean, apart from the irreconcilable deterioration of my body and mind, if we set that aside, probably the most significant change has been the diversification of the devotee community. When I first set foot in the London temple on December 26th, 1969, at about 2:00 in the afternoon, more or less,
Mhm.
There might have been 200 people or so, initiated devotees in the movement. And he kind of knew everybody by their
Mm.
first name. Well, I guess that's all we have is first names. Anyway, that was it. And it was quite family-like. And I think that appealed to me. I was an only child of a single mom. And, from a psychological perspective, and coming into the London temple was like inheriting a ready-made family. So, that was a pleasant surprise. ISKCON over the last 50 odd years has become an international institution. And there's the old saw that, God turns to the devil and says, I've had this great idea. I'm going to call it religion. And the devil thinks for a moment and says, yeah, let me organize that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as something becomes institutionalized, it needs to be funded, it needs to be staffed, it has to be differentiated from other institutions. You go through power struggles, you need all kinds of legal documents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
And the mood changed. It wasn't that warm, intimate family environment that I'd known in the early days. In those days, you could walk into Srila Prabhupada's room almost unannounced, and he was available and he didn't mind. You knocked on the door and he'd say, come in, and, waltz in the door and offer my obeisances. And he would look at me and say, Yogesvara, you're here. And then we'd have a discussion. We'd talk about anything and everything. We talked about his family. We talked about politics, talked about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, talked about therapy, talked about art. I mean, anything that came to mind, he was accessible,
Mm.
And I think that's really what hooked me in, was having that early close contact with Prabhupada, because those memories have sustained me through all of the changes within ISKCON. I look back on those moments with great fondness and appreciation,
Mm.
because I know how rare that was. I mean, most of ISKCON today, people never met Prabhupada.
No.
So that was special. In terms of other things that have changed over the last half century, I mean, here's the good news.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The good news is that we have a very diverse population that includes scientists, doctors, people working in government, the peace process. We have researchers, we have people in technology, we have people working in social services and community organizations. It's quite impressive. It's quite impressive to see the range of well-intending people who have been drawn to Prabhupada and his teachings and the ISKCON movement. And that's wonderful. That's needed. That's necessary. If all that we do is the basics from years gone by, then we've missed the point. The basics have to be there. But Prabhupada was unlimited in his aspirations for his movement. I think many people would be quite shocked to know what he had in mind for the future. So that's a big change.
Yeah. Do you, on the first point, can you remember, or is there a moment in time where you sort of felt that change, from the family mood? Because obviously ISKCON grew very fast. Do you have any kind of sense of when you just thought, oh, this is really changing now into something else?
Wow. Well, something comes instantly to mind that I'm not sure I want to talk about.
Okay.
Let's say after Prabhupada passed away, there were misunderstandings with regard to the role that he wanted the movement leaders to take. And look, truth be told, I remember he said to me one time that coming west, he had taken a transcendental gamble. I asked him, I said, you've got a bunch of monkeys here for disciples. I mean, what do you expect us to be able to do? And he said, I know. I said, I took a transcendental gamble coming here. I suspect that the most egregious moment was thinking that now we have to be like Prabhupada.
Yeah.
That if we're a leader, we have to be like him. And that was impossible. No one could be like him. And we learned the hard way that that was not only wrong, and in times it was immoral and unethical. That's also changed. I think the nature of the guru-disciple relationship has gone through a healthy evolution where the guru is not so much anymore, the grand master on high, but more of a team leader. Someone who directs the conversation, gives some ideas, and then allows people to grow up. And we first generation, we've had our shot. Now it's time for the younger generations to go show what they can do.
Yeah, it's interesting on our topic, critical thinking and constructive criticism. That was a crucial time, and from what I'd love you to tell us more about it. But from what I understand, many peers, God brothers who were obviously, one day, on the same sort of peers and friends, and next day, it's different tiered system. The ones that did speak out about it, let's presume most, if even if just some of them had, if not all, had good intentions, a lot of them ended up leaving, right? They were sort of pushed out. Tell me about that time where maybe they had good advice in retrospect, but they weren't listened to.
Well, look, open your doors to the public and just be prepared. You're going to get every imaginable kind of personality and psychic predisposition. People didn't become abusive or opportunistic after coming to Krishna consciousness. That was baggage they brought with them when they walked in the door. And they just saw opportunities to exercise that. And we didn't have the protocols and protections in place that we have today for children, for example. Recently, I had a chance to work with the GBC on what's called the ISKCON Code of Ethical Behavior. Very important development. We now have a document that spells out what we can expect of ourselves and others with regard to minimum ethical behavior as devotees. Spiritual progress is made through reform of character. It's not a matter of learning verses. It's behavior modification. It's coming to a point of becoming exemplary in society. So now we have something that describes what that means with regard to personal biases or financial protocols, relations with civil and national law, online behavior. There's a proper way to present grievances, and there's an improper way. So we have now documents. So things are coming along. It's been slow, but it's coming along.
Yeah, definitely. No, just on that last point, I wasn't meaning to dwell on the wrongdoing or anything like that. But in terms of the topic, like say for example, Pradyumna, he wrote that letter. So this is an example of, you could say, constructive criticism, or an example of someone who, despite the crowd, sort of had a different way of looking at it and stood up and said, "Hey, hang on a second." So not so much to pick up on the people he was talking about, but just that process of trying to exercise critical thinking and trying to exercise constructive criticism. Even today, the fact that it's a topic here in 2023 for us discussing it means that it's maybe not as common or popular or obvious within our movement today. And I'm just picking up on that example. So maybe more broadly then, why do you think it's not as common as it could be? And why do you think, what were some of the factors that maybe no one was, or not no one, but certain people were not happy to hear Prajumna's constructive criticism at that time?
Well, I mean, I don't know if all of your viewers and listeners know what it is you're referring to.
Good point. Yeah, very
but
good point.
he had sent a letter saying that, the idea that now that Prabhupada is gone means that his successor leaders of the movement are infallible beings and should be worshipped the way we worshipped Prabhupada, is the royal road to hell. And if we don't change this, it's going to be dramatically tragic. And it wasn't taken particularly seriously. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I guess what I'm using it as an example, but I'm trying to look at the broader picture, which is, let's say, perhaps then, why do you think in our movement it doesn't appear to be a particularly welcomed concept or a welcomed element? It's generally seen as a dissident type. Well,
be careful here, Ravi. I think we need to.
Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah,
Well, if I've learned anything in my old age, after all these years in Krishna consciousness, it's to not generalize.
Yes.
That gets us into trouble. You have to particularize. There are these individuals who feel this way, and there are those individuals who feel that way. And there's this attitude with this small group and that attitude with that small group. So I think we want to be careful about throwing everything into one big bag and saying this is how it is. Look, I've learned to appreciate the GBC and the institutional structure. I don't always like it. In fact, there are times, I'll confess to you, that I want to grab some people by the scruff of their dhotis and just say, "What the hell do you think you're doing?"
Yeah.
But I've come to appreciate the need for a conservative element. Let me put it that way. A conservative element, because it's the conservatives who stop liberals like you and me from rocking the boat too far one way or the other. The conservative leaders have a responsibility to preserve best practices from the past, make sure that our culture and theology remains intact, and that's an important ballast for our ship here. However, because the conservatives' job is to keep things on an even keel, you can't look to them for innovation. That's not their job. Innovation lies in the laity, lies in the congregation. It lies with the community, the larger community of non-leaders who have the luxury, they have the freedom of getting together on their own and saying, "Hey, listen, what do you think about this? It's a new idea, but what do you think? Should we give this a try?" I'm very much in favor, having been trained by Prabhupada and seeing how he acted, to empower groups locally below the GBC level to take initiative. If you wait around for some kind of official imprint before you do something, not much is ever going to get done. So in terms of innovation and new directions, it's very important, because if an institution doesn't do that, then it becomes calcified and dies. We have to keep growing and changing and evolving. So if you have ideas, if you're in a temple or a community somewhere, meet with others, put it out there, say, "Hey, do other members of our group feel the same way? And if so, maybe we can sit down and plan something out." That works very well.
Definitely. Well, we'll come back in to ISKCON, but let's take it out for a second just to explore this, because I really want to get into the challenges and the benefits of critical thinking and constructive criticism. So you've had a very varied and interesting, perspective, having been involved in a lot of different types of organizations. So you obviously had your time in ISKCON. You're an author. out in the world. You're a filmmaker, addressing content and topics which are much more broad and outside of Krishna consciousness. You've been a senior VP in a big comms agency. You've been a strategic director for the UN's Peace Conference on religious and spiritual leaders. So you've been involved in lots of organizational structures, whether it be NGOs or corporate and so on. So what have you seen in terms of constructive criticism or critical thinking in these organizations? Are they utilizing some of these things effectively, or is it equally difficult in any organization?
Well, there's enlightened leadership and there's less enlightened leadership. Some heads of companies or projects or nonprofits or whatever are terrified of innovation because they're afraid it's just going to kill everything. It's worked before, let's keep it that way now. That's the policy on a lot of organizations, and for some organizations that works quite well. I mean, you may not want people who are responsible for delivering electricity and energy to your home messing around with new ideas back at the power plant. But the more, I think, self-aware heads of projects, whether it's on the level of an organization like the UN or corporate America, have the courage to tell their employees and clients, I don't know. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't remember the last time I was sitting in a temple listening to a Bhagavad Gita class and hearing somebody say, I don't know. There's some kind of unwritten rule that says, if you've been around long enough, you should have all the answers to every question. And that's just plain silly. So a willingness to admit that we don't know everything is the first step toward progress, innovation, forward movement. When you talk about constructive criticism in the secular world, although I suspect it's equally true in religious communities and so on, the issue is often that the people who have good ideas are afraid to speak up. They're worried about their job security. They're worried about how they're going to be seen by their colleagues or by their boss. They're afraid of being marginalized if they say something that seems critical, or laughed at, not taken seriously. Probably the worst is losing their job. Someone's afraid that if they dare to say something against the head of whatever it is, that they'll be out.
Yeah.
And
yeah. No, I was just going to say, in a corporate sense, you're right. But I think also in our context, I think it's also that they don't want to lose their social status, may not be the right word, but in other words, we were talking on some of the sessions earlier today that of this idea of us being, sometimes like children and wanting and sort of not growing up. But then when you do grow up and you start to think for yourself and you start to question things and whatever, then oftentimes, at least my experience has been, those are when the devotees get to that point, instead of seeing them as, oh, these are the children that have grown up. Wow, I can't wait to see what they do next when they go out and they do things. And they're actually kind of almost sometimes seen as, oh no, now those people are bad association because now they have ideas that don't fit exactly with the manual, and so now we have to push them away. So in a way, sometimes in devotee circles, if you speak out what you really think about something, and actually, ironically, when you speak to devotees in private, like they may, then actually there's a sort of a risk that I've heard it said that years ago, if we lived in small villages and small tribes, that if you were ostracized from the village, into the forest, you would die. So there's a huge sort of almost fear to it's safer to be part of the group than to risk not being part of the group.
Mhm.
So I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, sure. I suppose there's some genetic paleontological explanation for wanting to just remain faithful to the group instead of an outlier. You have to kind of see this from the other side of the coin. Nobody wants to be the one accused of breaking the parampara. Nobody wants to be the person who's held responsible for disobeying Prabhupada's orders, right? Or going against the sampradaya. I mean, there are these kinds of not so subtle pressures just to toe the party line.
Yeah.
And what often gets lost in that narrative is how innovative our acharyas have been throughout our history.
Yeah.
We are a lineage of rule breakers. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they all broke the rules. They defied the systems because they knew that you change, you move forward, you evolve, or you can die. There's an example that I like to use sometimes. I had an office for a while in the Empire State Building when I was doing children's films. The company that was executive producing the films and releasing them through the Disney Channel or PBS or into the video market in those days had offices on the 53rd floor of the Empire State Building.
Wow.
In the winter months, Ravi, I kid you not, you could feel the building move. and I technically, if I remember correctly, there was a composite in the steel girders holding up the Empire State Building that allowed for something like 18 inches of sway in any direction. And the reason is that if you didn't build flexibility into the structure, it would crack and fall.
Yeah.
Well, what's true of building is also true of institutions. There needs to be enough flexibility to allow for growth, new ideas. Look, terms like climate change, genetic engineering, Black Lives Matter. I mean, these terms didn't exist when Prabhupada first came to the West. These were not issues. The world is changing. The issues change. Concerns of the greater part of humanity become something different. And while the theology of bhakti does not change, the foundational ideas remain the same. What's the foundational idea? All life is a spark of God. Those sparks that come into the material world forget their spiritual nature and end up in a cycle of repeated birth and death. They can evoke that original consciousness of themselves as divine beings by chanting the names of God. That's basically it. I mean, everything else is detail, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't change. But the application, the adapting of the culture around that theology has to take into consideration the time and place that we're operating in. It's not the same as it was even 60 whatever years ago when Srila Prabhupada came to America. It's just not. And he knew that. He did. I would love to be able to pop this balloon that people think Prabhupada is something calcified in time. And if he didn't do it, we don't do it. Well, that's just silly.
Yeah. Now that is silly, but you see, even just saying that, which I fully agree with you completely, and I think many people would, but is seen as, what we're calling critical thinking. It's in other words, it's kind of like you have a good logic for it. And I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll let you continue in a second, but it's kind of like seen as like, well, that's the risk. Like the safe person wants to go, because we can't be sure, just buckle down, just totally, the literalist, the fundamentalist, no blink, you can't look outside the blinkers. Do you know what I mean? So please carry on. But
look, Prabhupada told me personally, he said, what good is it that you're an American? What good is it being an American if you don't have good ideas and do something wonderful? He appreciated innovation. He was an innovator himself. Again, there is this, I think, fear of breaking the tradition. But what's not understood is that the tradition is breaking rules, breaking new ground, trying new things. Now, that said, we have this wonderful opportunity to present an idea to the Sangha of the Vaishnavas around us. Well, you should take advantage of that. If you just break out and do something on your own, you can get into trouble, and you're not taking advantage of arguably the most wonderful tool that we have, which is the collective thinking of the Vaishnav community. There's no reason to not take advantage of that. Right? And you're much better off sharing the credit. I'll tell you something that I don't think anyone else is going to tell you. All right? And I don't win any brownie points by saying this. Guys from my generation, us first tier initiates, we're a kind of a special group. By which I mean, we walk around with two emotions at work in us: fear and guilt. The fear is that we see all the women and men we grew up with dying around us every day. I've lost so many friends. It kills me to think I can never in this life have the company of Tamal Krishna or Bhakti Tirtha or Sridhar. Jamuna. These were my friends. These were my buddies. I miss them. I miss them terribly. And technically I should be wearing these glasses. These are anti-UV glasses,
Oh, wow.
Because I've had cataract surgery.
Okay.
And there's UV even indoors, but they made me look like Bono or something. So
you look like John McEnroe.
Or Roy Orbison. Oh, pretty Prabhu. Anyway, so I should be wearing those. I have hearing aids.
Okay.
I had open heart surgery. The whole machinery is just breaking down. It's a matter of minutes, and I'll be out of here. I've seen a lot of those of us who still remain living with fear because we're next.
Yeah.
And the guilt comes from remembering that I never really showed Prabhupada sufficiently how much I love him, how much I owe him, how big my debt is to him. And it ends up manifesting as these senior devotees fighting tooth and nail to get one more big one in for the Gipper,
Yeah, like
I'm
a
going
home
to do
run or
this
something.
service, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me how to do it or take it away from me. This is my thing, I'm going to do this. Well, that's tragic because, they end up. I'm thinking of very specific cases. Someone who tried tenaciously to hold on to a temple that wasn't his. And was on the brink of selling it, which would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of other people who have written books or made films, and they didn't really take much advice.
Yeah.
And they could have been so much better, these publications, had they just allowed the collective thinking to edit, to improve, and so on. But I think the mentality, and I don't think they're even aware of it. I think it's unconscious. is, this is my last chance. I only have a little time left. I'm going to do this. Seen it with big projects on an international scale. So there's that factor at work. So you have the fear of not wanting to break with tradition. You have, the ticking clock, which says, I'm going to do it my way. There are a number of reasons why constructive criticism and critical thinking are an uphill battle. But on the other hand, and again, not generalizing, but particularizing, there are a lot of devotees and a lot of projects who are wide open. I mean, I'm on the board of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. I get calls every week to join this board or this project. That I turn them all down. The BI, as far as I'm there because this is a forward-thinking group of devotee scientists. These are people with PhDs working in, neurology, brain studies, cosmology, physics. It's healthcare. It's marvelous. It's exciting talking with them, and seeing how they can bring concepts of our culture into the workplace where they're operating. That's wonderful. That's an exciting dimension. So both things are there.
Definitely. No, for sure there are so many pockets, and like obviously that's, I guess, our job, if we're more inclined in this way, is to try and seek out those projects and those people. And so it might seem like I'm glad you picked me up on that. I wasn't meaning to generalize, but I'm trying to pick up on a mentality, regardless of how many the number is, like even if it's just one person. But like, we've all heard the idea that, spiritual life, you just, so what do you think? You think what it says in the scripture, that gives you your answer. And then maybe, even the idea of thinking, what to speak of critical thinking, sometimes in the past, we will have all heard at some point someone say to us, well, you're thinking, you're getting your knowledge through your senses. It's imperfect. It's just, it's a path to ruin, So how do you personally then, to make it particularize, how do you, have you ever battled with that? And obviously it seems like you've come to a comfortable place now where you navigate things in your own way. The scripture, but you also, navigate, one thing I don't know if you told me, but I know I've heard it more recently, devotees talking about it, which they never talked about it before, that actually direct perception is a means of acquiring knowledge. Like it's a valid means of acquiring knowledge. It might not be the only one, but it is another valid means of acquiring knowledge. So in your own experience, maybe as you went through your devotee life until where you are now, what's your matrix for or your compass for going out and using your own thinking and in conjunction with maybe the more traditional, more straight and narrow view?
Well, what you might be referring to is a really wonderful interview that Ravi Gupta, Radhika Raman gave recently, where he talked about a Shabda Praman, scriptural wisdom and the place of pratyaksha and anuman, of sense perception and theory, if you will, as a kind of a tripod of checks and balances that you may not be properly understanding the teaching of scripture or the predecessor acharyas. You have to be revisiting your understanding, and you do that through your perceptions of things. Perceptions are not wrong. They may not be perfect, and we can be mistaken about things, but they're God-given gifts, these tools of analysis and perception, and they're not meant to be rejected. Those are the very filters through which we understand the world around us and which we assess the value of higher knowledge. So there's that side of it. There's also, from my own experience with Prabhupada, he would tell me things like, when I'd ask him, should we try this as an experiment? We've never done that before. He'd say, hey, go fishing, just don't get wet. He was somebody for everything. He wanted to see people happily engaged in doing what they had a proclivity to do, but just moving it in this direction toward their spiritual progress and developing a relationship with Krishna. And in the pursuit of that, he was wide open. I mean, he surprised me with how open-minded he was about things. I remember one time at Bhaktivedanta Manor, somebody with kind of unusual ideas for how to pacify the neighbors. This was back in 75, I think. Sent out invitations. This was in a rather aristocratic part of London suburbs. Come to our, Indian soiree for dinner and music. So the music was a rock band that he had enlisted somewhere, and they were up on stage jamming away, Rolling Stones and whatever. And the music was pounding right through the windows of Prabhupada's room up on the second floor. Back to the man. And I was in there with him chanting on our beat. We were chanting on our beats. We were just sitting and chanting. So I said, is this okay with you? So he got up. He was sitting on a cushion. He got up and walked to the window and he looked out. He got his hand in his bead bag and he's looking out the window. And he looks at me and he says, are they going to chant Hare Krishna? I said, well, I think that's the idea, was to, kind of get people interested with the rock and roll and then switch over to kirtan. He said, that's okay. And I said, I don't get how that's okay with you. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, you shut down the traveling roadshow. No,
I was thinking of that exactly. Yeah, in my mind.
Now, not everybody may know what that is, but it was traveling buses that had a rollout stage, and it was electric guitars, and it was doing devotional theater and, kind of on university campuses and other places. And it was very effective. People got into it. And I said, but you shut that down. He said, oh, I shut that down because it wasn't being managed properly. People were forgetting their spiritual business. They were into their roadshow business, but they were forgetting their spiritual. So as long as things were being done well, and a project didn't compromise someone's spiritual standards, our spiritual practice, he was wide open. And it was wonderful, exciting to see, So look, if I have a message to kind of just put out there to your listeners and viewers, it would be, don't live with guilt. Don't be discouraged. You have the right to exercise your ideas. You're a human being, with your very unique personality, and that's good. That's good. Welcome to Prabhupada's world here. It's a world of diversity. It's a world of inclusion. All of the best things that you'd ever want in a spiritual master, he had them in spades. Yeah. So, I would say, take heart. It's a very exciting movement that you've become a part of.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because I was talking to a devotee friend the other day about the because as you mentioned at the beginning, that the thing that had, one of the main things that had seen you through so much was because you had that association and that kind of those experiences, and sounds like some great conversations with Prabhupada. And so many of us listening didn't and don't have that. So then we get Prabhupada, and I was talking to my friend about this, that we get a kind of a version of Prabhupada that maybe, like a certain, if you imagine like an 8-sided object, you maybe getting to see it from one side or maybe 2 or 3 sides. And I feel like there was definitely I've even noticed it in the photographs of Srila Prabhupada. I can very clearly observe it. For a long time, like maybe 20, 25 years, there was a certain set of photos of Prabhupada. It was the very imperial kind of, powerful sort of emperor type photographs. And then in more recent years, I've started to see all these other photographs of Prabhupada, much more human and like, I know there's some famous ones of him laughing, but like ones of him laughing where it's kind of like, as well, if you're involved in media, you do a photo shoot and then people do a selection and they, depending on the lens of how they're doing that selection, they kind of go, oh, these ones look like impressive or powerful or like the leader or whatever. And then those ones, they're a bit too normal looking or a bit too like human looking. And now we're starting to, I'm sure you've seen them all, but like I feel in the broader, we're starting to see all those photos and I just love them. The photos of Prabhupada, the softer, more just off-duty Prabhupada in a way, you could say. So it's interesting. And one thing I wrote down when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you'd said that in the early days, there was partly a need from the young, you were all young, for a powerful leader. And so it was easy to slip into the relationship of Prabhupada just telling everyone what to do rather than the young devotees sort of speaking up and saying, well, I don't know if that's a good idea or whatever. But I was, you did there. You said to Prabhupada, well, why did you do this then? If you did that, I love that because that's how, that's what you would naturally think, right?
Yeah.
So
he never postured like, why are you questioning me? Never. He never said things like that. He wanted us to exercise our reasoning powers and challenge him and question things, because otherwise, how are you going to become convinced? Yeah, we were afraid, I think sometimes, intimidated because he was a pure devotee and he loved Krishna. I've seen his love for Krishna. And I know Krishna is real because I've seen Prabhupada's love for Krishna.
Yeah.
It was undeniable. He would walk in to a temple room and look at the deities and just start weeping. And it's like, what is he seeing that I'm not seeing? So yeah, that could be, it's like, even when you were with him, there were times you were like, he's not really here. He's with Krishna. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going on here, because he was multidimensional in that way. But it was also very, very warm-blooded and real and friendly and concerned, with us. He knew we were a bunch of nudniks and just like didn't know what the hell we were doing. So he was worried about us, and you felt that. You felt his love. One time he was recording in the Paris temple, and he had me playing kartals while he was playing harmonium and singing. And at the end, I looked at him and I said, you have a beautiful voice. And he looked at me and he went, Padmalocham. What does that mean? He said, Padmalocham means lotus-eyed. There's a mother who has a child who's blind, but because the mother loves the child, she calls the child lotus-eyed. So because you love me, you say I have a nice voice.
Yeah, it's nice. It's this sweet. It's funny, isn't it? It's our philosophy through and through. Like whether it's with God, with Krishna, with Prabhupada, with our loved ones. It's not the pomp and ceremony, is it? It's the sweet moments, the loving exchanges. These are the real things, right?
Well, they can be. There's also a risk in them, inherent in that kind of informality, that someone can make the mistake of thinking, well, this is my material father. And those are the people who ended up going away, leaving, because when he no longer fulfilled their emotional or psychological need for a substitute father, they went elsewhere. So, the formality of the relationship is important. It keeps a certain aesthetic distance. The one thing you don't want to do, and this is an important rule in Krishna theology, is assume that you're more spiritually advanced than you really are, that you're entitled to a closer relationship with God than you've earned. Right? I remember asking Prabhupada one time on a morning walk in London, I guess it was. I said, a lot of young devotees tell me that they're feeling disappointed because they don't really know their relationship with you. You're always traveling. They don't get to spend time with you. And he looked at me and said, so what do you tell them? I said, well, I usually tell them they shouldn't feel that way because you've invested yourself very personally in your books and in your classes and lectures. And if they're attentive to what you've already given us, they'll feel that relationship with you. And he said, okay, that's nice. You should also ask them if they're chanting their 16 rounds. And that kind of took me back. I said, what? Why? He said, because if someone's unwilling to follow the basics, where's there any question of a higher relationship? Now, this is another one of those tricky moments where I end up getting in trouble. It doesn't mean that if you're having trouble chanting 16 rounds, you're a demon. It's like time out. Time out here. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what you were talking about before. We get
exactly. Yeah.
There are times when it gets difficult. I'll use an example because he's given me permission to use it. My son is a pilot for Southwest Airlines. And he's responsible for the lives of 200 plus people every time he flies a plane. If he doesn't, and he has a special needs daughter, he's in the Alachua community. So if he doesn't get enough rest, that's a dangerous thing. So, it's sometimes difficult for him to chant his 16 rounds every day. And he's talked with his spiritual master about it. And, here's a good example of sometimes the rules have to be adjusted. And if your heart is pure and if your intentions are proper, you can do that. It doesn't, now people shouldn't go off saying, no, Yogesvara said we don't have to chant 16 rounds. That's not what's going on here. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that there are times when, you're better off chanting 4 rounds, fully attentive and with a heart full of love, than trying to mechanically chant 16 rounds and feeling bad about it.
It stands to reason, because otherwise it's just saying it's just some kind of, I don't know, mechanical formula or something.
Yeah. Somebody went to Prabhupada once with an idea. He said, Prabhupada, I want to do a book, 108 Steps to God. Prabhupada said, no, it's not mechanical like that. So,
yeah. We have a question from Dee. She's saying, what could be done to break barriers and enable devotees to do more critical thinking and questioning, or to cultivate maybe an environment where it was seen as a bit more okay?
Well, first of all, it's likely going to happen just by force of circumstance. I mean, you're either going to start offering constructive criticism and receiving constructive criticism and exercising critical thinking, or we're going to die on the vine. You don't progress, you don't grow without those tools, without being willing to turn the mirror around and look at yourself and say, okay, are we doing this well? Or is there something more we can do? What are your ideas? Inviting that input from others it's a foundational principle of friendship in devotional life. There are 6 activities. There's inviting someone to your home and accepting an invitation to someone else's home. There's giving gifts and receiving gifts. So there's opening your heart and hearing someone else open their heart. Those are the 6 symptoms of loving friendship in devotional life. So you want to call that constructive criticism and critical thinking? Well, fine, but I think it's pretty much the same thing.
What's the difference between constructive criticism and critical thinking and common sense?
Not much, really. Common sense is one of those rare commodities. I remember what Gandhi answered when someone asked him, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, well, it was a good idea. So, common sense is a real good idea. It's just that not many people have it, and there's reasons why. Look, we're emotional creatures. We're the product of our upbringing. You and I were talking about this before we started our discussion. We bring baggage from our earlier life, when we come to Krishna consciousness. And I'm a firm believer in therapy. I mean, frankly, I guess I can talk about this. I'm working with some senior devotees right now for getting mental health evaluation and assessment implemented as prerequisite to anyone assuming a position of responsibility in ISKCON.
Yeah.
I think we're nuts if we don't start implementing those kinds of checks and interviews right away. Imagine how much heartbreak and suffering could have been avoided if back in the early 70s we had people undergo psychological testing before they were allowed to be responsible for children in a gurukul, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, it's common sense, it should be done.
Do you think that it's easier with a philosophy or elements of the philosophy that we have, for something that could be just a mental health challenge to go under the radar and almost be disguised as or seen by others as something other than what it is, whereas in the sort of more traditional corporate world or whatever, it would stand out immediately. There'd be no way to disguise it or to dress it up as anything else. So do you feel like there's an element of that?
Well, I mean, I want to take a step back on that one as well. It's taken years and years for the kind of sexual harassment and other kinds of pressures that have been endemic to the corporate world, to the entertainment world, to finally empower people to step forward and say, enough, we're not going to put up with this any longer. I again, when people ask me, why has it been so rough the first 50 years or 60 years of ISKCON, why has it been so painful, so problematic, so riddled with crime and abuse and so many things? The only answer I can come up with is, it took the Christian church 2,000 years to become the largest institution on the planet, and they still got it wrong. Krishna is allowing us to make all of these mistakes in the first 50 years, and maybe 20 years from now, people will be able to say, no, they tried that idea back in 19 whatever, and it didn't work that, so we're not going to do that. And to evolve actually on a relative time frame quickly, the kinds of protections and safeguards and rules and guidelines that we need to grow even stronger, faster in the future.
For sure. And as you say, yeah, exactly. Even in the secular world, there's things that now are, everyone would accept as unacceptable that not so long ago we're actually, we shouldn't forget, like, we're broadly seen as acceptable, even though now they're so obviously not. Like, it's not like everyone always thought they were bad, and now there's suddenly, there was a time where they were probably a nuisance, but they were seen as kind of part of the territory. So if we're going through that phase now more and more, as you say, right now, where these things are coming up, and you're working on the ethics committee, and all these different things. If the devotee community were to make better use of these things like critical thinking, what kind of shift in the dynamic of the organization do you think we would see? And do you think it would make a difference in the quality of life for devotees? Do you think devotees will, do you think embracing more of it, critical thinking appropriately, will have a benefit in the lives of the devotees?
Well, before it slips away, I just want to mention to your audience that if they're interested in getting a copy of the Code of Ethical Behavior, they can download a PDF at iskonethics.com. If you go to iskonethics.com, you'll see it there in several different languages. Yeah. And also, if there is some moral, ethical, or legal dilemma that you're confronting in your community or in your life, you can also write to iskonresolve.org. And if you go there, you'll find the contact information. ISKCON Resolve is the mediation agency within ISKCON. And there are, I think, 60 or 70 trained devotee mediators around the world who are specifically there as intake points for redress of grievances. So if there's something that you want to report, you can go to iskonresolve.org. Now, as to your question, at this stage, I think if we don't open our heads wider, we're gonna flounder. I don't think Chaitanya's Mahaprabhu's mission is ever going to just evaporate, but I think it can remain marginal unless we grow and mature and learn how to transmit that mission into the wider human arena. That's what was always meant from the outset. We were not meant to just, well, I've got my name and my mantra and my beads, and I've got my thing, and so I'm good. That's okay. There's no harm there, but you're missing out on the nectar, as we sometimes call it. The real excitement, the groovy stuff, the cool stuff happens outside that comfort zone. It happens when you go out on a limb and you start taking some chances and you open yourself up to new inputs and new ideas and new directions in your service. That's exciting. That's dramatically exciting. And it's also what has to happen for the movement to fulfill the mandate that Prabhupada left us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. If anyone has any last minute questions, please stick them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed chatting to you in the lead up to this and today. So I really appreciate you taking the time as well to share some thoughts with all of us.
My pleasure.
So thank you to the, we're getting people putting in some emojis there. We've got a few heart emojis. Thank you to all of you who joined us today as well. I really appreciate it. And, these topics, I hope you've got some takeaways for yourselves personally, but I hope you can then share them with some friends as well and maybe have some discussion around these ideas as well. So I'll thank you. I'll thank Yogesvara, and we have one more session this evening. If you're free later, Keshav Swami is going to be talking about the importance of humanity in our spiritual lives, and there's sessions tomorrow and Sunday as well. So take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.